Welcome, and this is the second of two bidders conferences for the Request for Qualifications RFQ for the Senior Center Strategy of King County's Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services Levy Senior Center Investments. And we can go ahead and jump to the next slide, please.
Okay.
I'm joined here today by my colleagues, and we've got Adam.
Hello.
And Adam has led our community engagement process for the last 2 years around the levy, so meetings all across King County, including Skykomish, which is the furthest out city that you can get to in King County. But we've had a chance to get out and learn quite a bit from folks, and a lot of that is captured within this strategy. And then also by Marcy Kubbs. And Marcy manages our older adults and aging program inside of the county. So what I'd like to do is first, as you have questions, ask them. So the goal for this meeting is less about me and Marcy getting through our slides, and it's more about folks leaving with the information that you all need or want to make decisions and to participate as you'd like to in this request for qualifications process. So ask the questions as you have them. In some cases, we're going to be writing them down. A lot of the questions that we can't answer on the spot, we will take and then update a frequently asked questions document that's actually within the Zoom Grants document or the Zoom Grants program as an attachment. And our goal here is not only to answer these specific questions but to make sure that everybody has equal access to the information that we provide here today who might participate in this RFQ. But with that, I'll go ahead and jump into the actual slides. And the first thing we want to talk about is just a little bit of context setting. So the Veterans, Seniors, and Human Services Levy, a newly approved property tax in King County, a 6-year levy, and the administration of the levy or its implementation is really going to be broken up into 2 periods. And those 2 periods correspond to 2 plans. And it's really sort of legislatively driven in a way that we won't get into a ton of detail about today. But the takeaway is there is a transition plan and there is an implementation plan. And the transition plan is directing levy expenditures for 2018, which is year 1 of the 6-year levy. And the transition plan has already been enacted. So the county has already passed that plan. And that transition plan is what drives the RFQ that we're here to talk about today. But that second plan, the implementation plan, which once it's approved, so it is not yet approved, but once it is approved, will drive levy investments for the last 5 years of the levy, 2019 through 2023. And the reason to bring that up is, as proposed, the implementation plan carries forward the senior center strategy that the transition plan has. And so what we are looking at right now, and this presumes that the council will pass a version of the implementation plan that has some senior center funding in it. But just to be clear, the council may or may not do that. The council rightfully has the opportunity to amend the plan as they see fit. But if they do, this will be a sort of 6-year process where we are trying to, in year 1, provide funds to stabilize senior centers in the community, and then in years 5 or 2 through 5 or 6 to transform. Transform is a little bit of a pejorative way to say that. We've mentioned this in several meetings, and so this is not to say that senior centers have it all wrong and we want to change everything. What this really is a recognition that so many of the senior centers that we've talked to in the community have said that if they had the resources, if you all had the resources that you needed, you think you could do so much more than you already do. But you already do so much in the communities. And so I think that's just something that we want to make sure to recognize. Senior centers are points of connection, and you do a lot with relatively little, in some cases budgets of $20,000 a year when you get into different parts of King County. And so the idea here is to stabilize our senior centers in year 1, or to work towards stabilizing them, and then to help with that transformation. And where we're trying to get is this place that really, I think, captures what we've heard from a lot of senior center directors, which is that senior centers should become hubs. Hubs that connect people to each other. So seniors go to become socially engaged. And I don't have to talk to this audience about the risk of social isolation or the benefits of social engagement. You all know that well, and in many cases pointed us to that information. But places for people to connect with each other, And I think we might be able to jump to the next slide here in a minute. And then also, oh, I'm sorry, places to connect programs. So the other thing why we emphasize connection in hubs is we're not just trying to support senior centers in being gathering places, but we're also trying to support senior centers in becoming places where the county invests in a multitude of programs that serve seniors, and senior centers become the point of access, or at least a point of access for those services. And so in Crosscut, for example, there was this article not too long ago that featured one of our very own senior center directors here in King County, and she's posing this issue that she's confronting, that increasingly a lot of the seniors coming into her senior center are not coming asking, to play bridge. They're coming because they don't have a home or they're at risk of homelessness. And we know that there are a number of housing stability, financial stability, healthy living, social engagement, or access issues that seniors are experiencing increasingly in the community, and they come to senior centers. And so what we're really recognizing is that senior centers have sort of the two most valuable things that you could have in this field. One, you have a location in King County, in many cases paid for, but at least stable. And real estate is actually really expensive in King County. It may surprise everyone to learn. And you have recognition. You are already places in the community where many, although not all, of seniors within your communities come to access those services. So when we say transformation, we're really talking about driving towards and supporting senior centers and increasing their capacity to be that place where people gather with each other and where people can access relevant services that they need. And so the last way to sort of talk about that, the example that we use is right now King County funds legal services, and seniors could be people who could use those legal services, civil legal services. And a King County funded senior center right now might be able to say in a sort of indirect way, yes, King County also funds legal services, and yes, you are theoretically eligible for them, and yes, if you called this phone number, you could get on the wait list. And then the chances are that you would call that legal services phone line and that they would say that they don't have capacity, that they can't help you, and they will try very hard to connect you to another resource. But there's a system design and capacity problem there where the different parts of the system actually can't connect you in a sort of guaranteed or meaningful way always to get mutual effects out of the different programs. And so that's the other thing that we're really trying to do here. And by the power of contracts, which is something that King County has, we can begin to obligate funded programs to work with senior centers and through senior centers. So often in human services planning, I think the sort of practice has been you should collaborate, but then not to resource the collaboration. And so what we're trying to do differently here with the Veteran Seniors and Human Services levy, and for senior centers in particular with the seniors third of that levy, is to say that not only are we saying that senior centers should become points of connection, but we are going to begin to build contractual relationships with service providers that make real that possibility of senior centers becoming the points of connection. So that's just a little bit on sort of the overall context for what we're trying to achieve with the levy generally, systemization, and then with the seniors third of the levy specifically, stabilizing senior centers and then helping them to transform into those hubs that can become those central points of access. So any questions that I can answer on that or on the phone?
Just a quick question. In the research that you folks did leading up to where we are, did you find communities that were doing that with senior centers, that were using senior centers as hubs, or are we on the leading edge of this?
So the question was, are there, in the research leading up to where we are, did we find examples of senior centers as hubs, or is this something that, is sort of new? The answer, I think, is a little bit of both. Certainly, you can go to other senior centers across the country, and some within our county, where they sort of do this anyways, in an informal way at least. We also have a lot of examples. A lot of Marcy's early research sort of brought in also the idea of virtual villages, and senior centers are often at the sort of center of those.
Yes.
And those virtual villages, I think, kind of get at, in some ways, what we're talking about. But I think something that is novel, at least to our knowledge, is the funder, and some people might grate under this, frankly, but I think it's an experiment for us, is the funder actually using their role as the contract holder to set the conditions for that combination to be necessary.
So that's really interesting to me. It sort of reminds me a little bit of when the City of Seattle asked senior centers to partner with community centers and make an agreement so that you weren't duplicating services, sort of. But my question is, so if we're getting ready to move as the stabilization to move toward being able to partner with those kinds of services, is there a list of the services that you're thinking about that seniors will then partner with that you already contract with?
So Jeannie asked the question for folks on the phone of, as we talk about this vision, is there a list of what those other services are that we would seek to make senior centers the point of connection for which we would seek to make the senior centers the point of connection? There is. It's provisional, and it's in the form of the implementation plan for the levy. So that's a narrow way to answer the question first. And the reason I answer it that way first is King County actually has relatively few senior-specific services right now. Certainly seniors are amongst the people who are eligible to receive any King County funded service, but there are very few senior-specific county-funded services. And so as the levy comes online and its implementation plan begins to provide for a number of services, that's going to become the main body of King County's human services that are focused specifically on seniors. We've got some good music in the background for people on the phone. So I think the implementation plan itself is the sort of vision there of what those, and it's pretty specific. And so that's something that we can make sure that people have access to. And in fact, there are links inside of the RFQ document. The broader way to answer the question is one that I think we would actually want to reflect back to you all in some ways, is that this should not just be a point of connection for only King County services. It should be a point of connection, and senior centers already are, for a lot of other stuff. And so I think one of the goals that we'll have as we begin to partner with senior centers is how do we sort of consolidate that list and make sure that everyone has access to it as well. It's a good song. So if there are no further questions there, we're going to sort of dive into the meat and potatoes of this thing. So or just potatoes if you don't eat meat. The RFQ really is a set of questions that a panel must assess the responses on, and if the responses are satisfactory, that equals a valid application. And so another way to say that is, this is not an RFP that is set up in an inherently competitive way where you could get multiple valid applications, yet only one of them prevails and the other ones, quote unquote, lose. The nature of this is that we are anticipating somewhere between 40 and 50 potentially applications. It could be more, it could be less. And an application is valid as long as it is eligible. So let's talk really quickly about what that eligibility looks like. There are really sort of two major elements. The first is that the applicant be a senior center. It turns out that that's actually an interesting question of what constitutes a senior center. And so we've got a definition here that really has sort of four potential ways in. So the first, I think, is the one that is expected, which is, an entity identified as a senior center, recognized in the community to be one. And so usually if you have senior center in your name, for example, you're probably going to fit into that category. There's a second one where we know that there are a number of community centers that function as senior centers. And so they are community centers. They might not say senior center in the name. We may be in one of those right now. And so a community center that provides significant senior programming. And then the last category kind of has two possibilities. One is that you are a program that oversees multiple Older American Act funded small nutrition sites, or a senior specific program. And that's a little bit broader. And then if you sort of fit into one of those categories, then there's a sort of time showing. So do you operate for at least 3 days a week, for 15 hours a week? And if you can say I'm one of those 4 kinds of thing and I operate for at least that much time, then, and you can make that showing inside of the application, then that I would anticipate would be a satisfactory answer within an RFQ. So a panel would say, yes, this entity is a senior center. So any questions on what makes something a senior center for the purpose of this RFQ?
Well, I guess this is kind of the first time I'm hearing that potentially you would be eligible if you were an organization that oversaw nutrition sites. Is that new, or am I just been not hearing it?
It is not new. And in fact, your organization, as an entity that provides nutrition services to a number of senior centers or nutrition sites, is actually one that we are alluding to with that kind of language.
So we would be eligible, our community county would be eligible to apply for this RFQ.
Your service. So if you, we haven't quite gotten into the variety of things you can purchase, but you might need a freezer or something like that, refrigerators, things like that might be.
You've got a list.
Okay.
So the question was, and I apologize for not restating it earlier. The question was basically, you know, am I hearing that right? That there is a category of thing that is called the Senior Center for this RFQ. That is an organization that oversees multiple older Americans Act funded nutrition sites, and the answer is yes. So the other thing just to say about this is what we can't say here and won't say here is you're eligible, you're not. The form of any answer to any sort of version of that question is going to be, it is the responsibility of the person or the persons filling out the application to include within that application the information that a rating panel needs to take a look at that and then come to that conclusion. We just emphasize that so that people take care in that. You know, just because you are, for example, the Pike Place or Pike Market Senior Center, but if you, for some reason, fail to include hours of operation of sufficient amount inside of the application, the panel's instructions would be to reject that application as ineligible. We have responsibility, just for fairness, to judge on what's within the applications. Next slide, please. All right, so there is also a sort of subcategory just to spend some time on what we've called a small nutrition site. Sometimes within the RFQ, it's a small senior nutrition site. But this is a really sort of, I think it's clear in that there is an attachment on the RFQ, I believe it's attachment 6, and it basically has a list of all the entities that are funded with Older Americans Act funding to provide nutrition services. And if you are on that list and you are not a senior center, then you are a small nutrition site. And the reason that we identify these is that there's something that we'll talk about a little bit later called an inclusion incentive in one of the 4 areas of investment. And inclusion incentives really set up a structure where it is possible for an applying senior center to propose a partnership with a small nutrition site and actually be able to attract additional RFQ funds to promote that partnership. Any questions on small nutrition sites? Anybody on the phone have a question so far?
I have a question about the small nutrition site incentive, because you've already said before that there would be a maximum of 15,000 that it would $1 for the proposing entity and $9,999 for the collaborating institution. So there, I'm thinking forward to handling the grant funds. Would the collaborating entity be
purchasing things being reimbursed by the other one, that they in turn being reimbursed by the county.
Dagmar's question, and tell me if I don't get it totally right, is that the structure of the inclusion incentives is one where we have said that the senior center that proposes in its application to have the partnership would be eligible to receive up to $5,001, and that the partnered small nutrition site would be eligible to receive up to $9,999. And Dagmar's question, as I'm hearing it, is really about what's the sort of billing structure that's inherent there? Is it something where the small nutrition site bills back to the senior center and then up to King County that way? Or is there some direct from King County to small nutrition site piece? I think I'm going to give a lawyer's answer, which is that it depends. One of the things that will depend on is what the sort of nature of the proposed partnership is and what it's intended to do. It is possible that King County, through a letter of award, may directly provide funds to a small nutrition site up to the amount of $9,999. If it were more than that, it would have to be a separate contract. It is also theoretically possible that it would be funds that are provided to the senior center acting as a fiscal agent for the small nutrition site. And it's also theoretically possible that the funds would be provided to a third-party fiscal agent for a small nutrition site that's also not the senior center. I think that's something that we would take a look at what the application proposes, and then in the contract negotiation get specific about it at that point. And we would certainly welcome, statements of preference from the parties that were involved there. Please.
What is the small nutrition site? Is the goal to create collaboration between the sites, or is the goal that we offer the opportunity for them to also be a connection site, or that we're doing exchanges of that it can be meal centric since that's what they do rather than connection centric? Or I was just trying to get to sort of the heart of what the goals are with that inclusion clause.
So the question is what's this all for? What's the purpose of having inclusion incentives? And Jeannie, mentioned, is this about, bringing the folks from the small nutrition site into the senior center, or is it doing something at the small nutrition site? And the way that we answer that, one, it's arranged. So we have 4 areas of investment, and we'll get to those in a minute. But these are arranged very deliberately under the first of those, which is to increase the diversity and inclusion of folks who are being served by senior centers. And just to dip into the why a little bit, we talked about this big vision as senior centers becoming the sort of centralized points of access. One of the things that I think we certainly hear a lot about in the county, there's not a lot of data on it, but it's certainly something that people seem to react to, is that in some communities, some senior centers are not serving the full diversity of the community that surrounds them. And so as we take a look at what is frankly a really large multi-year potentially investment in senior centers, one of the things that we want to make sure is that this is something that can benefit all seniors in King County, the full diversity of seniors in King County. And the question was, how do you, in an authentic and meaningful way, help a senior center become more inclusive if it's not already inclusive? And there are probably effective ways to do that and ineffective ways to do that. And this is a little bit of an experiment. This is not something that's happening someplace else. We just knew that we wanted to promote collaboration as opposed to competition. And we knew that we wanted to provide a meaningful, authentic way for example, a Vietnamese community to work with a senior center where there's not a current relationship there, and that current relationship's absence maybe for any number of reasons, but that we are actually trying to pay, in a crude but sort of accurate way, for the formation of the partnership itself. And so what we're really trying to say is we would love for a senior center to identify a community where and using some of the information about demographics that one must go through in order to complete the application, they might say, oh my goodness, it looks like we probably have a large Latino community in our service area, and yet none of the people who we serve are coming here as Spanish speakers or Latino. And how could we propose a partnership and not just have it be knocking on the door and say, come on over to our senior center, but to actually put some resource and some money behind that so that the two entities could get creative and say, what would it actually look like to try to build something authentic and to have some resources behind it. So it's actually not a whole lot more specific than that, which is one of the reasons why the amounts of money are relatively small. I don't want to pretend that this solves everything, but that's the idea, is an experiment to see if we happen upon effective models of partnering large centralized organizations with smaller, sometimes isolated cultural communities, where we think that if we got them together, we would be able to actually provide increased access to all levy-funded services, not only for the senior center, but for its now increasingly diverse group of users.
Could I add just a little something to that? And that is that the senior centers have a richness of programming that is not available at many of the small nutrition sites. And by providing some additional funding, it may be share some nutrition sites, whether they come to the senior center or vice versa.
Is that limited to one partnership?
No.
You could do two and ask for 30,000.
Yep. So the question, just for folks on the phone, is there any limitation on the number of incentive or inclusion incentives that a particular senior center might seek? There is not in the RFQ a limitation to the number there. Please.
So if I understand, the applicant will be the collaborating agency that's collaborating with the small nutrition sites. The second thing is, so does it needs to be an existing or something that we are working, or something that we have to plan or like approach?
So the first part of the question was who can apply, and if this answers your question, the application must come from the thing that asserts itself as the senior center, as opposed to the small nutrition site itself. And then the second question is, does it have to be an existing partnership? Can it be a new partnership? What we're trying to do is to increase diversity and inclusion. So I think that absolutely contemplates new partnerships, planned partnerships. And in an application where it's sort of reinforcing an existing partnership and in a way that doesn't expand anything or increase anything, I would think that would be less responsive to the prompt. So I don't think it's a sort of way to fund something that already exists exactly as it is. But again, it's really what's in the application. Please.
Are there any other limitations, like for example, if they need transportation or they need bus tickets or anything not related to programs that they are already offering them, because that is the kind of needs that they have?
I apologize for interrupting. The question is, are there any limitations? And there were some examples. Could this fund transportation? And the answer is there are not explicit limitations on the type of partnership, and something like transportation services to bring the two groups together, I think, are squarely within the intent, are absolutely an example of something that would be responsive to what we're trying to do here. So in that case, the barrier is we've got a lot of folks who would love to attend, but there's just not a practical way for them to get there. So in order to foster this partnership, we're going to pay for the transportation. I think that'd be a perfect example.
Question, Neil. At the last meeting I attended, you folks talked about avoiding funding cliff, because this is one-time funding, no guarantee going forward. So any proposals would have to address the fact with the funding as how we would sustain this, assuming this was working.
In fact, let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. So the question was, in a previous, in the one previous bidders conference, we spent some time talking about the one-time nature of investments from this RFQ and avoiding or just making clear to applicants that this is a 2018 funding source. Its period of performance is the remainder of 2018. And this is not going to be something that provides funding starting in January 2019 and forward. And so what we're asking folks is to tailor the types of things that you propose in this RFQ to that reality, that things that can be solved with one-time funding, or where you would want to sort of promote something and see if it worked, or where you might be in a situation where you need to maintain funding, because if you couldn't even maintain it for another 6 months, you'd have to end something. Those are all, I think, responsive to the one-time nature of this RFQ. And what we just really want to be clear about is, for example, somebody who proposes to start a new social work program, and they would like to start that in September of this year, and that's what they put in their application. The only thing that this RFQ can do is fund that from September through December. And we just feel like it would be irresponsible to not be crystal clear with everyone that this RFQ will not provide funding beyond 2018. So as you're sort of prioritizing what types of things you might use this resource to apply to help do it, to stabilize your senior center, we strongly recommend that folks not set up, to use Joanne's words, which was using our words, funding cliffs. We don't want for this to end up being a net negative for any senior center, because we used some funds to start something and then we end up in a position where it's like, oh my goodness, how do I continue this now? So that's just something we want to be, excruciatingly, I'm sure it's excruciating right now, but excruciatingly clear about. This is a one-time funding source, and its period of performance is the remainder of this year. Does that answer your question, Joanne? Sir.
I still don't subscribe. There's 10 people there. There's 4 of us on the phone.
So the question was, and it's a good question, is if you did, many senior centers have said that they would love to start social work programs. And if we did want to do one of those, when's the right time to seek that? So assuming, well, not to assume, if the council passes a version of that last 5-year plan, the implementation plan, that continues to fund senior centers, and just to say it, there's no indication right now that that's something that is going to get pulled out of that plan. But again, the council does not take its direction from me, nor should it. There will be a subsequent RFQ or RFP process that would set up procurement of that 5-year allocation of funding.
It would not be in this RFQ.
Not this RFQ. It would be completely separate and distinct. And what we can't do right now is tell you exactly what kinds of things that would be to purchase. We've got to wait for that policy. But what I can say is that as it's been proposed, the two fit into that schema that we talked about of stabilize, transform. And so to the extent that bringing on a new social worker would be part of a transformation project for a senior center for 5 years, if it goes through similar to how it's been proposed, I would think that would be an eligible type of use.
That'd be similar to, say, every program, they want to wait for an ongoing.
Absolutely. So the question was just another example of, if we want to do a long-term new memory program, is kind of the gist of the question is this the right RFQ to do that, or should we be waiting? And all I can really say to that is this is probably not the right RFQ to start something big and new unless you have some set plan for how you would continue it, in which case I believe that the application basically says, please include the documentation of what that is. Mm-hmm. So, please.
I'm sorry, I still have the same, I had the same question that I asked at the last one about this list of people, of entities. So nobody's been defined yet as a senior center because you have to prove. Can you propose partnerships for the inclusion that are like another senior center, or anybody that's on this meal program list? Or do we somehow have to identify which ones are the small meal sites and partner with them?
So the question is, on attachment 6, can any of the entities there propose a partnership with any of the other entities? And basically, how do we know what's a senior center and what's not a senior center and therefore a small nutrition site? And the wording of the RFQ, and this is not how we directly responded to it last time, and I'll ask Marcy to add to this, but the wording of the RFQ on the inclusion incentives basically says that a small nutrition site is something that's on the list that does not otherwise qualify as a senior center.
So how do we distinguish those is what I'm saying, since you have to prove that you're a senior center?
So for example, the Central Area Senior Center, and the list actually has hours of operation and days a week on there, would probably not be a small nutrition site because I think as long as they contained within their application that information, they seem to meet all of the criteria. And the other thing is, what's the intent, again, of the inclusion incentives? So the intent is to form new partnerships that bring new people and new types of people into your senior center. And so to the extent that it became a goal to sort of take two existing senior centers and partner them with each other, I think that's less what we're talking about. And to the extent that it's an Iraqi meal program that doesn't currently have a place to go do a matter of balance exercise classes, but they are a great place to actually gather those seniors, how do we get them into a senior center and have access to that senior center?
Sorry, just to follow up with that question, I'm actually the conference specialist. And I just want to make sure I'm giving the right information to all the sites. But so are you saying that a small nutrition site is basically if they're not operating like at least 3 times per week, right? Okay, so all that is a small site.
You also have to be offering programming.
Yeah.
Nutrition.
Right, in any of those areas.
Right. You don't necessarily have to provide all 4, but some degree, some variety in those categories.
So yeah, and Marcy's right on there. Read that definition like a lawyer might read it. I think it says an array of programming such as or including. It does not say within 5 of the following categories or 3 of the 5 following categories. So that definition piece is key. And so for folks on the phone, the questions were basically how, do we understand correctly that a small nutrition site is anything on that list that is not meeting the day threshold or the hour threshold of the definition of senior center? And the answer is yes.
If I could add something, attachment 6 has the list of nutrition sites in King County. And one way to begin identifying the small nutrition sites is to look the days, the number of meal days that are provided. So if you've got a program where there's 1 meal day a week, that's a pretty good sign. They are probably going to be in the category of small nutrition program versus one that's providing meals 4 days a week, in which case they may qualify as a senior center.
But they may be open a lot more than when they're serving meals, right?
Exactly.
So Jeannie's point is a good one. Her question is, but they may be open more than what's shown on the piece of paper. And so this is why it's structured the way it is what appears to be a small nutrition site may actually operate 6 days a week for 40 hours a week. And if they include that in their application, they can become a senior center. And so if at the same time somebody else had also proposed an inclusion incentive with that same group, as we review all the applications, I think the process would be, eligible senior center, so their application is in itself good, and then the incentive partnership proposed with them is probably not, because at that point it's a senior center. But if the senior center fails to satisfy that definition in their application, then the incentive partnership remains feasible. So what we didn't want to do is classify people ourselves and possibly have an error in there in a way that locks them into a particular path. This really sets it up so that people can articulate for themselves, you know, what they are, what they want to be there. So 4 investment areas, and this is, you know, in an earlier meeting, I think fewer of you were here, but this is our 4 flavors of ice cream analogy. But basically what we're saying is that this RFQ has 4 areas in which a senior center may propose investment. One of these areas, the first, is mandatory. The amount is not mandatory, but there must be at least some part of the application that proposes to use some amount of funding to do something that will increase participation and diversity. And I think on the RFQ materials it actually says inclusion there. And so that could be some money, you know, that supports an inclusion incentive. It could be a number of other things, sort of infinite combinations that a senior center itself might identify. But the purpose is what's key. The purpose is that we are increasing access for underserved or marginalized or isolated populations of seniors in King County, again, under the theory that as we begin to layer on services to senior centers, it's an important thing for us to be doing to make sure that the seniors in the community have equitable access to those resources. So we spent a lot of time there, but any questions on what we mean by required, or this is the mandatory one? Okay. So so you got to have some diversity flavored ice cream on your ice cream cone, at least a little bit. You could have all that flavor, or you can begin to combine the other 3 categories, and so we can go into those now. The first is update organizational infrastructure. So the RFQ has a list. Just to be clear, that list is illustrative. It is not exhaustive. In other words, it provides examples, but it is not a limiting list. But the idea is that there are types of things that a senior center could apply for that increase the capacity of it as an organization to do the things that it would like to do or needs to do. That might include staff training. Really importantly, it might include a data system. So we're going to talk later about the data requirements that are going to come commensurate with receiving this funding. And the thing that we hear over and over again from senior centers and other providers is that King County wants us to provide all this data, and then they don't fund the equipment, the people, or the expertise to do it. This RFQ can fund the people, training, equipment to answer your data requirements for this RFQ, or frankly, for other types of things that want that information. So that data infrastructure and capacity is absolutely part of your organizational infrastructure. The next category is minor investments in capital to improve or enhance or maintain or enhance a facility. So increase the diversity of the people using it, increase the capacity of the organization. Now we're at maintain the facility itself. And the thing to point out here is that it contemplates that somebody could request a capital project as part of their funding, but that the value of any single capital project requested may not exceed $49,999. The reason for that gradation is that above that level, CBDG, the Community Development Block Grant Program, actually becomes a more appropriate funding source, we believe. It also has to do with the fact that the period of performance that we're talking about on these contracts being frankly less than 6 months by the time this process gets through is not likely going to lend itself to major capital projects and renovations. And then the last one is programming. So earlier versions of the RFQ materials said lowest priority. We've removed that phrasing, but it is this thing about one-time funding, funding cliffs. I think there's a difference between maintaining programming. So if we don't get this, we're going to have to fire somebody, versus I want to hire 5 new people to do something. So the intent here being to maintain and then enhance senior programming, because there might be ways that you can enhance programming by, we want to build a new stereo so that the Rihanna song can actually be played louder so that everyone can hear it. And then, that might be a way to enhance programming with a one-time investment. So any questions on these categories?
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can hear you on the phone.
I have a couple. One is, when is the levy expected to be passed, or when is that, what's the timeline for that?
So on the timing, the levy is passed right now. So the timing of what we're waiting on is the passage of that implementation plan that we talked about, that last 5-year plan. I believe that'll happen sometime late this summer or early the fall. But the plan that actually authorizes this RFQ is passed. And this RFQ is now open, and it will be open through, I believe, midnight on June 7th.
Okay, so the next procurement process will occur. Which one is that referring to?
So the question was, when will the next procurement process occur? So that refers to a potential subsequent RFP or RFQ if that implementation plan, which is not yet passed, contains a senior center strategy. So we would expect that would happen sometime towards the end of this year or maybe early next year.
Okay. And then the other one is there a maximum amount that we can request in addition to the...
So the question is, this is a good question, is there a maximum amount you can request? We have included within the RFQ that we expect awards to be in the amount of somewhere between $55,000 and $75,000. And what we have asked is that any amount that's requested above $75,000 comes with a prioritization. And so to answer your question, no, there is not a maximum amount that you may request, but any amount that is above $75,000, we're asking you to begin including prioritizations in the event that we have to make a partial award there.
Would that be, let's say we asked for $75,000 and then we were looking at the small nutrition sites at $15K per site, would that be on top of that?
Excellent question. Is the inclusion incentive additive to the $75,000, or does it come out of that? It is additive. So you might request a $49,000 capital project, a $25,001 other project, and then 2 inclusion incentives at $15,000 per, and that would be a total of $105,000, $75,000 in your senior center request, and then 2 $15,000 inclusion incentives.
Okay, thank you.
And you.
So in order to enhance or to increase the participation, so hiring someone like a coordinator with language, help with language, is that something can be considered?
So the question is, could you consider hiring somebody to provide translation or to provide language access for another group? You're going to get a frustrating answer from us, which is that this will not provide funding beyond 2018. So I think that's clearly an eligible thing that somebody could make a case for. But what we'll be looking for if you're going to propose to hire new people is, are we just going to be firing this person 4 months from now? But senior centers are resourceful, so it might be that you have a matching grant, and that just kicks in January 2019, and it can go for another 6 months. And so what you would propose is to be able to, you were planning to hire in January, and now you think you could hire in September. I think that is something that could totally work, where we just, again, we do not want to set up a dynamic where a senior center that got funding is then disappointed or angry or has misunderstood at the end of the period of performance and says, you just funded me, how can you be defunding me now? And that's not because, it's not an attempt to be pejorative to anyone, it's just, if we're not absolutely clear about that now, there's an opportunity for misunderstanding. So we're just going to be excruciatingly clear about that now. That we're not going to tell you that that's not eligible, but we're going to say there's got to be part of a bigger plan if it's hiring somebody new. Otherwise, to I think the question over here with memory care, perhaps the thing to do would be to see if a subsequent RFP that's going to give longer funding windows might be the more appropriate vehicle for it.
Maybe it has like a sponsor project where it can be initial outreach help to get someone. So maybe
I think that kind of thing is squarely within the intent. One thing I do want to be really fastidious about is that we are not going to sit up here and say that's eligible, that's not eligible. It's kind of like the eligibility thing. We're going to say this is what it's intended to do. Your application must make a showing there. But that idea that a small term project could increase language access or that you might translate materials are things that are absolutely within the intent of what we're trying to do in that first flavor of ice cream, if you will.
Will the committee be looking at the senior center budgets? Will that impact their decisions? Like some senior centers may have a higher operating budget than other senior centers that have a lower, threshold for revenue, and will that have a better impact on the decision?
So the question is, will a senior center's other resources be relevant to this RFQ's consideration of the application? And the answer is no. So you might have a $10 million budget as your senior center and make an application for a $5,000 thing, and that's going to be looked at the same way that a senior center with a $20,000 a year budget will their application.
And then secondly, it looks like there's $3.7 million available in this funding source, which is just the fall source of September through December. And that second implementation amount hasn't been determined if they do fund that, correct?
That's correct.
So we don't know if they do fund it, what that amount is.
That's correct. It's been proposed to be at about the same scale, but we don't know what the council will ultimately decide, and we don't know that the nature of the following RFP will be the same. And what I mean by that is that it would be any eligible entity gets awarded RFQ style. It may be that it becomes something more like an RFP that says we're looking to fund 14 senior centers to become hubs. That's not my attempt to sort of hint anything to anybody. It's just that I literally do not know what the form of the next procurement will be. All right. I think that's the end of my contribution to this.
Yes, I have to chairs here so I can get on camera. Timeline. I'm going to start moving into the nuts and bolts of the RFQ. I think we've gone over much of the timeline already. It's open. This is our second information session. The next date of May 25th is an important date because it is the last date that you may contact the technical assistants, the 3 technical assistance agencies that are available to help programs. And Bonnie and Catherine, do you want to wave to the folks here? Bonnie Olson and Catherine Veretti represent 2 of the 3 agencies that are available to assist for free. And so we are encouraging everyone to take advantage of their resource. They are able to discuss your ideas, give you some feedback on whether they believe that it is a good fit for the RFP. They can do editing. Am I missing something back there? Or that pretty well covers it.
Yeah, we can kind of look at your narrative and help make sure that you're not missing some of your descriptors that will help you get approved. Help maximize your chances for getting this.
Right. And there is a handout sheet up front here that provides their contact information. And it's also available in Zoom grants. I believe it's attachment 1, if I'm not mistaken. So we have also decided that May 25th will be the last day for you to submit questions to us about the process, about the RFQ, what are we looking for, that kind of thing. Okay, next slide, please. So this is the kind of the nuts and bolts of the RFQ. I want to go through this very quickly, I think. I created a summary sheet, which is up front here, that provides kind of a synopsis of its contents by page number. Quickly, up through about page 9 is going to be background about older adults, some of the characteristics of older adults in King County, why we are looking at funding services and programs for older adults in King County. I believe everyone is probably aware of the difference in King County in the longevity rates, with areas of South County, older adults may live 10 years less than in other parts of the county. Pages 10 through 12 addresses the 4 investment areas, the 4 flavor of ice creams that we just walked through, that Leo just walked through with you. Page 12 is the eligibility language, which we have also discussed. Again, let's see, page 13, the amount of funding available is $3.5 million. We're expecting awards to be around $55,000 to $75,000, and there is, of course, the small nutrition site inclusion incentives at $15,000 each. Attachment 5 in Zoom grants is where you will find zip code data. Originally, we had created maps of King County with data available by each zip code. We took those maps and kind of took the Excel spreadsheets behind the maps, if you will, and just created one large spreadsheet. So across the top are all the zip codes in King County, and along the left-hand side is going to be all the data points, just to make it easier for programs to identify their zip code areas and the population that they may be able to serve. Any questions about that? That is going to be, there are several questions in Zoom grants on your service area. What zip codes do you think you may be able to serve? What is the composition of the population, the older adult population in that potential service area? So that will help inform your answer to the question about increasing participation in diversity. Page 15, there is some discussion about the reporting requirements. We will have all of the programs reporting on unduplicated clients that are served. We will not be asking names, but we will have information that we require, and there is a link to a sample data report.
Can I ask a question about that, please?
Yes.
This is Leah Kent. This is not data that we currently completely capture. We encourage people to register in our registration system, but it's not required to have lunch or be in the building or go to a free program. It's only really used if they're signing up for a class or trip, something that requires a payment. So I'm assuming that this participant report, this is after we've been granted the money. If that happens, then we have to start the participant data. Because I'm saying we're at this point, the City of Kent is going to be purchasing a new registration system that's going to be in the cloud type of registration system, and it's we don't ask people for their ethnicity at this point. So I want to know how much I'm going to have to change what we do in order to do all this reporting.
So essentially the question is, we currently do not gather this type of data. We'll be will we be required to do that? And the answer is yes.
Okay.
We are providing funding for software to accomplish that, for computer systems and training of staff on technology in order to support programs making this change.
Well, because, we're a big city and we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a new registration system, and the city doesn't even want to see another registration system in our facility that isn't going to talk financially, to the city's system. So what I guess we'll have to do is hopefully we can structure the new registration system to capture different information and really knuckle down and getting people to actually register, which of course will be different too. Now they can register online at home if they're computer savvy, or they can register with us. But okay, that was I just wanted to make sure that I was reading it correctly, that this was going to be a requirement.
Yes, this will be a requirement, and it sounds like you will want your city IT folks to speak with you or whoever the vendor is that you may be looking at purchasing your computers from, or your software.
Right, yeah. All righty. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Marcy, question, are you also going to be asking for the demographics associated with that unduplicated count, or just an unduplicated count?
It is more than just the question was, is it just an unduplicated count, or is it more detailed than that? And you will see in the sample report that it does include the demographics. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So we have talked about the timeline, and the proposal requirements starts on page 16 of this document. More detailed information on the proposal requirements is actually an attachment 2 in Zoom grants. We have discussed free technical assistance and review a proposal. The last bit of information in this document refers to the insurance requirements for our particular King County department. So you'll want to take a look at that to be sure that your program is current in terms of insurance coverage.
I would just comment that many of our nonprofits use NPIP as coverage, and I actually went back and asked them that list if we were all covered. So since we are, I wouldn't be surprised if others are also, if they're using the same.
Okay, so NPIP?
NPIP stands for Nonprofit Insurance Program.
Okay. So if you've got that, you're indicating that they should be in pretty good shape for meeting those. Okay. We may be ready to go to Zoom grants itself.
All right. You want to talk about how they can find access to it, and then I'll pull it up?
Yes, good point. Thank you. So this slide indicates first listed is the link that was emailed out to most of you folks. You can connect to Zoom grants that way, or if you are having any difficulty, you may go on our website, kingcounty.gov/VSHSL, scroll down, and there is a spot where you can link directly to Zoom grants. How many here have already gotten on Zoom grants?
So on the main site, there's a couple of ways to get to it if you're pretty savvy. It's on the left-hand side under Funding Opportunities. Also, if you just scroll down, there's a big call out here. It says Senior Center RFQ Released. And if you click the link, it'll take you to a page with some common concerns or questions here at the top, as well as some detailed information about it. And as you scroll on down here, you'll have the Applying through the Zoom Grants page with a link that you can open up to a new window to see it in full view.
Do you want to click on Open Program?
Sure.
When you link to Zoom grants, it will take you to the Open Program page. On the right-hand side, you'll need to enter your name and create your own password that will allow you to get back into Zoom grants. You can go back in, edit things you've already entered into the program.
So Marcy, my organization could potentially have up to 7 proposals that have been submitted. It appears that the system is allowing people to record the investment organization.
So question is whether or not you can create multiple
accounts within an organization and
Yes, you may apply multiple times. You will need to change the name, of course, in which you are applying. So each time for each of your senior centers, their name will appear in the agency name in the beginning of the questions, but you would enter the same EIN number. So you will enter Southeast, or maybe it is Sound Generation / Snoqualmie Senior Center, or Sound Generation / whatever other agency, but you may have the same EIN number.
But Zoom is allowing us to have multiple accounts within Sound Generation's organization to apply. Is that true?
I believe that is true. If you have difficulty,
I think it's happening right now. I can't keep track of everything that's going on, but I think a couple of folks have set up accounts, and I don't think they've run into any kind of hand saying, no, you can't do that. So,
yeah, I think we are good. I think it has that capability.
Okay, good.
Okay, the next, let's see, this is has taken us to the request for qualifications description. It's essentially a summary page, gives you a little bit of the background, talks about the eligibility, our future vision of investing in hubs, senior centers that are acting as hubs. And if you scroll down a ways, you come to the library section, which is very important because that is where you will find all of your attachments. So we have, the first one is the document that we just walked through very quickly, then the technical assistance providers and their contact information. Attachment 2 is very important because it provides the language, the details of the question. There's so much information, we were not able to put it online. So it is in attachment 2. You will need to refer to this document to be sure that you are understanding the question and answering all of the elements in it. It also provides a list of the criteria that the review panel is going to be using when they review your submission. So that's also important for you to be aware of and keep in mind as you're answering your question is what is the rating committee going to be looking for in your answers. Attachment 3 is a checklist which we have provided here at the front of the room. And we'll be spending some time walking through. Attachment 4 is also important. Frequently asked questions. At our first session, information session, we received a number of questions. I spent Monday kind of going over those, adding to that list, and it has been reloaded. And we have committed to answering questions a minimum of once a week. So you will want to check that document periodically to see what new questions have come forward that we have answered for you. The other items are zip code, attachment 5, zip code demographic table, which I mentioned. The attachment 6 is the nutrition, the list of nutrition sites in King County, which Aging and Disability Services very kindly shared with us for the purposes of our RFQ. And there are Are we able to open that to show
Yeah.
people what the report 7, attachment 7, the sample?
Yeah. Internet Explorer is not great to work with this stuff. 7.
If it's difficult, we can just move on, and folks are able to.
Oh, I've got it here.
To pull that.
So yeah, it opens up in a separate document too, which is can be convenient.
And it moves to the left. This is what the monthly reporting form will look like. You can either use this form, or if you have an Excel spreadsheet that captures the same data, you can talk to our performance measurement folks and see if it is compatible with our system, and you can probably use that. Okay. So let's go back to Zoom grants.
Okay.
What I want to walk you through now is how to maneuver through Zoom grants. The attachment 3 Zoom grants outline and checklist will be helpful, I believe. If we scroll down a bit further, you will see there are some initial questions for you to answer at the bottom of this page. Name of your agency, the contact, your total requested, which you may put in much later. And then at the very bottom, there's the next button, which you have to get there in order to move on to the other tabs that are available in Zoom grants. So if we hit that.
And all of these can be hidden. You'll notice it has a bunch of text up here that you've seen over and over again. If you click on the tab or click on hide this after you've read it, it should collapse it all. And now you'll just have the bulk of what you'll focus on after that.
Okay. So when you hit next, you get to this next page. And this is where the work really starts in terms of your entering information about your proposal. And page 2 of the summary sheet lists each of the tabs. These numbers represent a tab. The summary tab was filled out on the page we were just on. We've got our application questions section. And there are essentially 4 elements, 4 areas where you will be responding. So your checklist indicates that. If we scroll down, you will see basic background information. And if we continue to scroll down, this is where you will enter a lot of the demographic data on your potential service area after reviewing the zip code spreadsheet. We've asked for a really short summary of your program, 4 sentences. I'm interested in infrastructure funding and capital and something quick and simple so that we have just a little snapshot of what you're proposing to do.
And as you go through too, you'll see at the bottom it says maximum characters allowed. So if you are concerned about how much you can write, it should always be there at the bottom, and it actually does update as you go through.
So what we recommend is that when you have narrative questions that you create your responses in Word first.
Mm-hmm.
And then under review word count, it will give you the number of characters. And you want to pay attention to that, to each of the narrative questions. Know what your limit is for that question. When you write in and check in Word that you are going to be able to just cut and paste that in without losing your last paragraph, which would be very tragic if you just spent 2 hours developing your response to that question.
So, this is sort of related. I know these programs have gotten much better. Dramatically, I think was the first step to tread where pages here to go, and they've come a long way. So they do sort of say that you go.
Yes.
But you're recommending parents all of it in Word and then cutting and pasting it in versus just, in some cases, the answers are pretty simple and you just switch directly in and you're not going to have worries about it coming out or shutting down on you and losing it all.
So there's multiple questions in there. First, regarding saving, you will know if it is saving your work because it will blink save a couple times and stop. That's a good sign. It has not saved your material. If it is flashing saving multiple times, it means it is having difficulty saving. I recommend clicking away from that particular spot and going back to it. That's a warning sign. There's something that is not working. So that is the saving, the information about how you save. It saves frequently for you. Let's see, what else were you wondering?
I think in the Word document is helpful because if you've got a lot to write, you have to kind of scroll through this little tiny viewfinder and like check to make sure you didn't misspell a word up there or whatever it may be. Whereas you can see the whole thing in Word and then you could plunk it into maybe like a small little space.
Short answers work, but for your long narratives, which are going to be in for questions 19 through 23, those are the 5 questions. One is on essentially the history or the background of your organization. It provides us with information on an agency that King County may never have funded before.
So on that capacity question, and I believe what's in there is like your accounting experience and what you have about the state board, a whole bunch of things like that. It seems like, at least for our folks that are applying, even though they would be applying on their own, say a secondary senior center, that we would take the lead and use sound generation's capacity and experience versus secondary senior centers. Maybe a combination, a little bit of theirs, with certainly the connection to the community and serving seniors. But we take care of their accounting, their HR, all of their insurance. So wouldn't it make sense that some generations would respond to that and send them the language?
I think it's up to you and your agency, your organizations, to decide how you want to answer that. Clearly, it seems like it's going to be the same information for some of the central functions that you provide. So you may be able to provide a paragraph or two on those central functions that you provide for all of your organizations, but then there will be some information unique to those two central area senior center, how long they have been operating, that kind of thing. So you're going to have to kind of collaborate with those organizations and figure out what you can best provide for them and what they can do on their own.
Could I add one thing, Marcy, back to the thing about doing the document, doing your draft questions in Word. If you are working with a technical assistance provider, if you do your drafts in Word, then you can email us and we can email back and forth and give you feedback. If all of your stuff is in the Zoom grant, we can't access it, so it makes it more complicated to have us review and figure it out.
Another good point, another plus for working in Word. It can be shared with the technical assistance providers. So again, questions 19 through 23 are the bulk of the RFQ. Each of those provides 6,000 characters. Is eligible. You can put in 6,000 characters, so you'll want to pay attention to that. That's somewhere around 2 pages, I believe. But that is the maximum, and it will cut you off if you try and put in more than that. So just to clarify, the total points then would be 150? 150. Each of the 5 questions is worth 30 points.
And it seems like, for example, the minor capital investments piece, if you're not requesting any funding in that area, does that mean that your total points would be 30 points less?
It's a very good question. We came upon this a while ago, and essentially what we will do is take the number of potential points and the number that you scored for each question and convert it into a percentage. And that way, whether you have responded to only 2 questions or to all 5, we will have percentages that we can compare. Let's scroll down a little further, and if there's no more questions about this, we'll hit next. We come to the budget tab, and as you can see on the summary sheet, there's 4 potential items to fill out there. Your budget request by those 4 flavors of ice cream, if you will. In addition, the lowest line there says that is where you would enter the amount you're requesting for inclusion incentives. So if you are planning to partner with 2 small nutrition sites, you would enter $30,000 there. If you are proposing a capital project, we're looking for some information there about what is the total estimated cost of your project. You can provide some details underneath there, if you will. If your licensed contractor has provided you with an estimate, that is a document that can be uploaded. We'll talk about that later, but it is the tab to the far right as you look at the top. And there is also a spot for a short budget narrative. What is the amount? What's it for?
Next.
Next. Okay, we're at the questions in table format. There was some information requested that was just not easy to put in a long kind of narrative manner. So the IT person at Zoom Grants created a table for you to use there's demographic data up above. Let's see, first is the small nutrition side. Okay. That's where you can enter the small nutrition site you might be partnering with. Then here's where there's additional demographic information that is requested. It simply had to be put into a table format in order for Zoom Grants to be able to gather the data and create a report for us.
Is that about the partner agency or about yourself?
That's about yourself. So it's a little out of sequence. I wished it could have been created and be located with the other questions about what your service area might look like. But because of the nature of the question, they needed to create a table, so it appears here. It's sort of an odd one, a little out of place, if you will.
Can you just clarify that? Is it what your service area looks like? Is it what you currently serve or what you want to serve with these resources?
This particular chart is what your service area, your potential service area, what the demographics look like. And we are asking for some information, basic information on your staffing. So we have a sense of, is this a 1.5 FTE senior center, or is it a larger senior center where there's multiple staff available? A little more background information.
Yeah, I'm not super clear on the percent on the project, given, so if this is the whole center and you've got 3 people working, they're all whatever, 100%, whatever, right? Make a certain amount of money. If it's a capital, so that could fill it out that way. What you're asking for is capital money and a little bit of translation. You got a bit of
Yeah, the question is the column where it talks about percent of time for the project. And I think that was language that the IT person at Zoom Grants used perhaps better language would be associated with the senior center. It may be applicable to community centers where you have a manager who works part-time on the senior center, but I suspect we may be able to take that column out. But let me think about that and get back to you.
For those of us who have a lot of part-time staff members, are we able in the budget request to say we want to bring somebody from 20 hours a week to 30 hours a week for this period to do the additional work of the whatever's being proposed?
That seems like that would be
I assume, but I
right. Right. Again, you know that this funding ends December 31st.
Some employees, if you increase their hours, you get provide benefits if you keep them over a certain number of hours a year too.
Yes, of course. Yeah, well then there's place in the budgeting for, I think, where I saw as we were scrolling down for the fringe benefits as well as the straight salary.
We've moved ahead now to our last tab, which is uploading documents. We have requested a 1-month calendar of senior center activities. This is where you would upload it. Your capital project, if you do have an estimate, you can upload that there, which would provide the raters with additional information about what you're proposing. The third one is a letter of partnership for the nutrition site. You must demonstrate that the small nutrition site is interested in partnering with you. So this is where you would upload that. Let's go back to just up one, the letter. Actually, you may upload an estimate of the capital project, but also if you are going to be combining funds that you have requested from King County for a capital project with other funding that is available. And we have heard this is something some programs are interested in. We want to see a letter of commitment from the other entity committing those funds to be sure that this project is viable and can be completed. And this is where you'd upload it. And that takes you to the end of Zoom grants.
For the required documents that needs to be uploaded. So for our program, it's not a senior center. We provide service through our partners. So I don't see like how can I upload something like activities for like what would that look like for us?
You're talking about for the question is what would a monthly calendar look like for an agency that oversees the provision of nutrition services to multiple sites? And I think the answer is that you may not have a monthly calendar that will look the same as a senior center. If you have some sort of information about activities through the month, you could certainly use that space to upload that information, but you are not going to look like the usual senior center. That's primarily what we're looking for there. Any other questions? G?
Yeah, I always have questions. Sorry.
That's fine.
I have one more question about
nutrition sites.
So I've been thinking about that. So Sound Generations is a qualified senior center applicant, right? Or you could make the argument that they are because they are a multiple meal provider site. So does that mean that all of the sites that are here that are listed with Sound Generations are not small meal sites because Sound Generations would be a meal site? It would be an eligible senior center applicant, or like ACRS who has seen. It looks as though most of them have a big supra, multiple meal site, or is that? I'm just trying to figure out who's eligible for the incentive, the inclusion incentive. So if they are already associated with Sound Generations, who is an eligible or is probably an eligible entity, does that disqualify them as a site that we could do a partnership with?
So I think the best way to approach this question may be to look at the map of King County where we have located all of the nutrition sites in addition to all the senior center sites. You're going to take the step of determining your potential service area. That is going to then limit the number of small nutrition sites that are in your service area. You're not going to be, you as Pike Market are not going to be partnering with a nutrition site that's located down in South County, for example. You would look at those nutrition sites close to your senior center, ones that you think might be in your potential service area, as you have self-defined it. Who is in that may meet that definition of small nutrition site? Reach out to them if you're interested in partnering. See if they are interested in the partnership. And that would be the way that I would proceed, rather than sort of excluding potential partnerships based on the fact that Sound Generations provides nutrition services. The exclusion is for other programming activities. It's for building that relationship regardless of who provides the nutrition program. Is that helpful? If you move in that direction, I think it'll help. Bonnie?
I was just going to say, I was trying to mull over that exact same thing. So if I can just rephrase what you just said and tell me if this is correct. So for example, with that example, if you wanted to approach a Japanese meal provider, you would approach Suma Mondal, who's in your area, rather than Sound Generations.
She's with Sound
I'm sorry, you're right here.
She's with Sound Generations.
She is.
Okay, so you approach the provider of that meal program, not the big overarching organization. Is that right?
No, she's going to want to talk to that particular nutrition program.
Right.
And Marcy,
yeah.
Aren't you trying to actually reach pockets of the community that currently do not have a meal program, and connect them with organizations that do have a place to offer meal?
So the question is, are we looking for them to partner with other pockets of the population? For the purposes of this RFP, we are asking them to reach out and create partnerships with these small nutrition programs.
Okay.
Is it possible at some later point, depending on how the final implementation plan looks, that we might do something different? That's a possibility. But for the purposes of this RFP, that is who we are looking at senior centers partnering with.
So it doesn't matter if maybe a small site has an affiliation with a large mothership.
I'm sorry, say that again?
But there's an affiliation with a large mothership, ECRS or whatever. It doesn't matter if that becomes irrelevant to the partnership.
To the extent, yes, you have to reach out to those in your service area.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if they're
It doesn't
Sound
matter.
Generations
So-
supported or.
It doesn't matter if it's Sound Generations or ACRS. If one of ACRS's nutrition sites was in your service area, you could reach out to them and explore the potential for a partnership.
But not if they're a senior center.
Not if it's a senior center. And we clarified that in the frequently asked questions that were recently uploaded this week. It's very clear that the applicant must be a senior center.
And maybe this is a test for me, but just to say it again for everyone, any senior center can propose a partnership with any small nutrition site, regardless of any affiliation that small nutrition site may have. the small nutrition site must agree to the partnership, and that's where the form upload can happen. And in reviewing the total set of applications, if we see that we've got, a small nutrition site that is also a senior center, then it is not likely to then be eligible to be a partnered site. But that would require that small nutrition site to both have applied itself and to agree to have been partners. And the fact that a small nutrition site is one of, for example, Sound Generations affiliated sites, and Sound Generations applies as a senior center, does not foreclose that small nutrition site's ability to be a partner organization. But, they've got to agree to it. So in some ways, we're kind of going through the academic permutations of what's mathematically possible. And the real question is whether or not a Sound Generations provided site is going to agree to partner with another senior center that seeks to. And so the academic possibility may actually be foreclosed by the sort of functional reality of it. But that's really for everybody to decide. The key thing is the point of the inclusion incentive, which is to get more and different types of people into the senior centers that are being funded.
Yes, and so it's population client driven, not organizational structure driven. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Any other questions?
I just wanted to clarify what he just said. So the goal is to get the people from the field site into the senior center, you said? Okay,
It's a
not the
partnership.
other way around.
It's a partnership.
It's the partnership, and this is where the theory, this is why we spent a little bit of time on the theory. We are going to be, over time, stacking as much service access as we can into senior centers. And in doing that, we have a responsibility to get as many folks from the community into the senior center, to have that partnership there so that when the new services come, those people have a meaningful way to access them through the senior center, since they are not going to be directly available sort of, through the nutrition sites themselves.
Catherine.
I have a different question on the rating. If an agency is applying in multiple categories and they're doing the percentage that you described, it's conceivable that you have a really good response in one area and really tank in another, which brings down their total score. So is it possible they can be funded in one area and not another, or is that going to make them less competitive?
Overall, the applicants are going to be successful if they successfully answer and get 50% of the available points, which is really not a very high bar, I don't think. I think folks are going to be pretty successful in answering these questions. Any other questions?
Just a very practical detail. In one place it looks like the noon time is noon, and the other place it looks like midnight.
That we did have a discrepancy on this primary document that was noted at our last week's bidders conference, and we have corrected that. What is posted now is consistent. It is midnight on June 7th.
And if we're worried about it at 11 p.m., maybe we should have worked a little harder earlier.
Maybe. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, thank you all for coming. It's great to see all this interest in the RFQ. I am really excited to read some of the proposals that come in, see what sort of creative ideas we have for partnering with other agencies, with the nutrition sites, and as well as what kind of plans you have for your own senior center. So thank you. And let's see, one other thing I should mention is if you have additional questions, there is a contact admin tab. Can you get us to that? Contact Admin tab, which is now highlighted in blue. If you click that,
Does it work?
it will create an email that comes directly to me. So submit your question in writing. We will consider your question, develop a response, and we will update attachment 4 with the frequently asked questions. So again, you'll want to keep periodically reviewing that attachment to see if there's more questions. The other thing that happens is when I update frequently asked questions, I can look in Zoom Grants and see who has an incomplete application. It means all the people that have started and created their own account will be notified by email that we have updated the frequently asked questions, or if it's another document that we've updated. Some of you have probably already gotten an email from me with that information. So that's how that process of asking a question and getting information back to you happens. Okay, thank you very much. And